if you're making something, you have to make the thing. And I got to tell you, I think the odds of you making that thing well right away, really low odds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you need to become a master at making something, which you can't skip the time part. You can't skip the commitment part. You can't skip the trial and error part. You can't.
Welcome to The Successful Pitch. If you're a startup founder struggling with your investor pitch, we can teach you the steps to get funded fast. We interview investors who share their pitch funding criteria. We also talk with founders who share their startup funding success stories. Funding strategist John Livesay is your host each episode. Having helped many businesses craft their funding pitch, Inc. magazine now calls him the Pitch Whisperer. John will help you learn to craft your own concise and compelling pitch using the same tactics he used helping businesses during his 15-year award-winning sales career at Condé Nast, combined with insights from his best-selling book, The 7 Most Powerful Selling Secrets. Once you are pitch perfect from the tips you learn on this podcast, John can make the all-important warm introductions to the right investors who have appeared on the show. Your funding success begins with the successful pitch.
Today's guest on The Successful Pitch is Tom Scott, the CEO and co-founder of Nantucket Nectars, which got sold in 2002 to Canberra Schweppes. It was a huge success story. He shares with us what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur and have a successful exit like that. He said, you have to make a product for yourself. And so he and his co-founder loved the juices and made it for themselves. And then he talks about how important it is to be concise when you talk about new things, when you're pitching. And he said you can't skip the trial and error time that it takes to make something really great. And he goes on to talk about the Nantucket Project, which is a version of TED conferences with incredible speakers. He has great insight into the founder of TED because he did a documentary on the gentleman, Richard Saul Wurman, who said most information doesn't inform. The interview begins in 45 seconds, right after this information on how you can get funded fast.
Are you a funder struggling with your investor pitch? Do you need warm introductions to the right investors to get your startup funded? Do you need a funding roadmap to get you there fast? All of this and more can be found in Crack the Funding Code. Join host John Livesay and Judy Robinette, best-selling author of How to Be a Power Connector and board member of Illuminate Ventures, on their free Crack the Funding Code webinar. Simply go to Judy Robinette, that's JUDYROBINETT.com, and click on the webinar tab to see how to tap into their network of investors from around the world. There's a link in the show notes as well. You're only one click away from getting funded fast.
Hi, and welcome to the Successful Pitch podcast. Today's guest is Tom Scott, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Nantucket Project, and he was the CEO and co-founder of Nantucket Nectars, which started in 1989 and got sold to Canberra Schweppes in 2002. And he has gone on to do so many amazing things, including being a film and television creator that's won awards at both the Cannes and Sundance Film Festival. And he created something called Doc Apple Pushers with Ed Norton, a documentary on that. So he's an expert in storytelling, and that's all the secrets that go into making a great pitch. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I want to first start with, if you don't mind, because you're such a successful entrepreneur, taking our listeners back to how you and your co-founder came up with the idea to create Nantucket Nectars, and you're competing against major brands like Snapple and all that good stuff.
How did we come about it? You know, we had started a business many years ago that was a floating store. We were doing this in the summers in college. And the notion was you had all these yachts that would come into Nantucket Harbor, and in order to get to the land, they'd have to take a launch, and it was a pain in the neck. What if you could just bring a store to them? So we did. We started selling coffee and muffins to these yachts in Nantucket Harbor. And among the things we started to sell was juice. And, you know, I should say that, you know, depending how old a listener is, in those days, there was no such thing as Tropicana Pure Premium, as an example. Generally speaking, not even generally speaking, maybe entirely speaking, if you got a juice off a shelf in a store, it was pretty crappy. And what we were making at the time was a fresh juice, and it was different, and it was more refreshing, and it was something special. And that's how we started. I mean, the path took a lot of different twists and turns, but that's how we got in the juice business.
I love it. The initial problem was that there weren't good juices, and you solved that by creating a floating store to take it out to people who would be willing to pay a premium price for something good.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It just didn't exist. And really what we were doing, and I always feel this is so important, we were making it for ourselves. As simple as that. This was something we wanted.
So the passion was authentic. You would drink this stuff. It's not something you're like trying to force on people. So when you're telling them about it, it comes from an authentic place. And when you're telling anybody, whether it's a potential customer or potential investor, what you have to offer, that you can't fake that passion, right?
No, I'm one of those people, and you hear it more and more, if, I think it was Henry Ford, if I listened to my customer, I would have ended up making a faster horse. I've always made things for myself. And every part of my career, I've been making something I want. And, I have to be honest, I stumbled into that. But one of the things I've come to know very clearly is I'm decent at making something for me. But if I have to imagine the attributes of what somebody else wants, it's just not who I am. It's not my makeup. It's not how I sort of think about business.
Right. Well, the same thing is true with a lot of other innovators like Steve Jobs and the iPad. If he just waited for people to say, I need an iPad in addition to my laptop and iPhone, he probably wouldn't do it, just like the Henry Ford example. So you guys were selling multiple things. So what was it about the nectar, the juice, that's made you guys think, this is what we should focus on? Because that's a big challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs is focus.
It's true. I'm going to say most valuable to us at that time was naivety. We didn't know what we didn't know. And we had a whole lot of energy. And because we had so much energy, you can move mountains. And you will aggressively try things that others might think foolish. Now, some of those things you're going to find out probably were foolish, but plenty of those things you're going to find out were not. And it's vital. It's vital. So I would tell you that we came to learn and practice incredible focus. But in the beginning, the idea of stepping into such a crazy competitive field had much more to do with naivete than it did with anything else.
I'm going to tweet that out from the episode. Energy gives you what it takes to try new things. That's a great, great line of that. And of course, if you're drinking healthy nectar, I'm imagining that's giving you good energy, right?
I mean, mostly. I mean, some of those things, drinking too much juice is probably not a good idea either, but it's probably true with most things.
There's a happy medium, yes. So you started the business in 1989. You and your co-founder are going along. Did you ever need any outside funding, or was all the revenue coming in just from sales?
No, we more than anything else. Again, and I'm sorry, I'm being a bit of a broken record here, but I didn't know what a venture capitalist was. I didn't know what a venture. In those days when I was 24 years old, okay. When I was 24 years old, somebody called me an entrepreneur. Okay. And I thought, what a jerk. This guy's calling me a shyster. Now, I was a relatively well-educated guy. I'd gone to Brown University. I didn't know exactly what the word entrepreneur meant when I was 24 years old. And the reason I tell that story is it was a different time. I mean, the idea of Series A, Series B, venture capitalists, angel rounds, like all that stuff is new. None of that stuff sort of existed as in like the collective conscience of like pop culture. So many of the pieces of the puzzle that went into sort of growing the company, we were unaware of, but I never would have thought, I wouldn't have even known where to go to get money. In part because I didn't even know you needed money for cash flow. We didn't even understand what cash flow was. We did wonder how and why we were always running out of money. But the long story short is we were very, very frugal. We had other jobs at night. We did what we could to sort of survive. We therefore ran a very efficient business. Now, I did have to take a loan from my father, But in the history of the company, we raised approximately $2 million, which is unheard of today. And we borrowed, eventually we were able to get a line of credit from a bank based on receivables and inventory. It was an asset-backed loan. Mm-hmm. And we grew the company into the many millions of dollars exactly that way.
That's a great...
Which is just very different than I think the way people think about these things today.
Well, one of the things that's probably not different is how to build a great team. So whether you are pitching an investor, angel, or otherwise, they all want to know who's on your team. So you've obviously created a great culture, not only at Nantucket Nectars, but what you're doing with the Nantucket Project. Can you tell us what you look for when you are deciding whether to hire somebody to join your team? Do you first decide what your culture is and then see if that person's a fit?
It's funny. I was doing an interview this morning. I'm all about chemistry. I'm all about the chemistry with that person. Are they a good person? Can you riff with that person? Can you trust that person? Can that person place their trust in you, etc.? It's huge for me. It's huge. Mm-hmm. I don't always get it right. But I got to say, nobody ever gets it right. I mean, it's
right.
Hiring people is not a, you don't hit 100% on that kind of thing. But I definitely, there's some of the people I worked with at Nantucket Nectars, started as truck drivers and ended up as the president of the company. I mean, I'm saying that's a literal example.
Wow.
There's been many of those kind of throughout my career. I'm okay with on-the-job training often, and I really just believe the amount of energy and focus somebody puts into something, if they're reasonably smart and they're reasonably aggressive and they're reasonably entrepreneurial, I think you can work with a lot of different kinds of people.
Oh, I love that. Energy and focus again. There it is. It just keeps coming back over and over as, again, the key criteria for hiring the right people to fit your culture. Now, you're going along. Obviously, you weren't planning on selling the company. And then from 1989 to 2002, there was no strategic exit strategy for anybody. What made you decide to sell, and were you worried about what you're going to do after it sold?
Yeah. The answer is yes. I was worried about what I would do after I sold. And here's the thing. We worked very hard. I think most people who start businesses do. Nothing unique about that. But you spent a lot of years on the road. You spent a lot of years selling, staying in lousy hotels, always afraid of making payroll. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing. And in particular, I think at our age, and we were relatively naive at the time, it's fatiguing. And I think, we had 150 distributors around the country, and you got to visit each of them about twice a year. Well, do the math.
Oh.
That's a lot of travel, a lot of trips, a lot of sales, a lot of stuff. And because our names are on the label, it was people found it critical to meet with us as individuals, Tom and I. Mm-hmm. So the answer as to why we sold, we never tried to sell the company. We never hired investment bankers. There came a day when we were sort of hotly pursued. And in the end, there was probably 7 different companies talking to us. We whittled it down and ended up making a decision to do what we did with what was initially Ocean Spray became Cadbury Schweppes. Based on the fact that we liked those people, based on the fact that we felt they could do good things with the company in the future, et cetera. And you asked also, was I afraid? I was a little bit afraid, but I should tell you that I had been so busy for so long. Mm-hmm. There came a day when I just decided it was time for me to leave, because after selling the company, they wanted us to stick around. It wasn't a match for me. I definitely freaked out. I felt like, what in the world am I going to do now? I never considered having to fill my days,
You had the opposite problem, right? At the time, yeah.
That's right. So anyway, so that's kind of the story of how we ended up making that decision.
So how long was it between selling it in 2002 and starting the Nantucket Project? Tell us, what was that, and how did you come up with this great concept of having this annual conference? And I'm going to let you describe the vision for it, because you can do it much better than I can.
You said at some point earlier, and I'm paraphrasing, but I've been successful in businesses, startups. I've also been unsuccessful. I've had a number of misses, but you know, even at Nantucket Nectars, like if you took snapshots at different periods along the way, you would wonder when you looked at some of those snapshots, how in the world this company's ever going to make it. I think it's just part of the gig. And I mention that because when we were at Nantucket Nectars, we made our own ads, we made our own radio ads, we made our own printed materials. We had a staff inside that we would do it with. We never used an ad agency. But I loved storytelling, and I've always loved films. And I went to the first ever Aspen Ideas Festival. I think that was 2003. And I also was a big fan of TED way back. We used to have a designer who worked with us at Nantucket Nectars. And he said, let's go to TED. And I said, get us some tickets. And he said, no problem. And then he told me the price. And I was like, hey, forget it. We are not going to that. We couldn't afford it.
Right.
But the way to me, I love discovery, and I love people who sort of go to the front lines of anything and they come back and they sort of share discoveries with us. I just think there's something so beautiful about it. And particularly now, you know, it's like we have such availability of information, which is a good thing. But we also have a massive quantity of noise. There's just so much noise in the world. And when you can get a concise telling of interesting new things right from the horse's mouth, to me, it's like mental cocaine. I just find it, you know, so exhilarating. And I think when you mix it together, in other words, when you have a number of people passionate about the same things and sharing similar things, it's like it's a Woodstock of ideas. It's like a Grateful Dead show of information, and that's how I kind of think about it.
Well, Tom, you just defined what I like to define as the perfect pitch, which is a concise telling of new things. That it triggers our lizard brain, something new, and I'm learning, and as you said, mental cocaine, because we crave that. And if you have that when you're pitching for a customer, a team member, or an investor, you can tell a story that engages people, then you're light years ahead of others who can't, correct?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, you know, look, yes, I think the answer is absolutely yes. I was watching the Golden Globes the other night, and you know, you're looking, and Jeff Bezos is sitting there and winning, and NBC's get 0 nominations.
Right.
And you think, oh my God, do we live in a different world? A show called Mozart in the Jungle. And when I don't even know what that is, but I thought, I want to see that. Just the title feels new. It feels like a discovery. You know, here's the thing though, and I think oftentimes, you know, if you're starting something or you're new in a business, like you want to tell that story. Here's the frustrating truth. If you're making something, you have to make the thing. Like, I don't care if it's a juice or a service or whatever it is. And I got to tell you, I think the odds of you making that thing well right away, really low odds. Like the fact that, you need to become a master at making something, which, you know, I think you can't skip the time part. You can't skip the commitment part. You can't skip the trial and error part. You can't.
Yes.
And until you know what that product is, because you've been on the battlefront and you've been building it, only then will you know what it is, or how it works, or how it could be better, or why it's better than everybody else's. You literally, like, you're just not going to know. Only then can you package what it is you're trying to do. And I feel like so many people want to tell a story before they actually even made it. And it gets in their way. It just gets in their way. And they say, and I'm doing air quotes right now.
Yes.
They say creative things. Well, I always say, be creative in your making your product. Then the telling of the story will be easy. Just translate.
Right.
Translate the thing you're making to someone so they can understand it. And if either A, they don't understand it, or B, they're not turned on by it, I'm guessing your thing ain't all that interesting.
Well, we're going to tweet that out. You can't skip the trial and error time needed to make something. That's so important to remember, because a lot of people go, why isn't this an overnight success? And rarely is anything an overnight success. So you decided to take your storytelling skills from making your own ads at Nantucket Nectar into creating the Nantucket Project, which is this annual conference, and just decided to become a television and film creator and producer. That's an amazing pivot, if you will. It's an expansion of your skill set, but a lot of people have dreams of, I like movies, I like storytelling, but they don't get to do what you did. What was it that allowed you to figure out your way into that world?
Yeah, one of the things about the Nantucket Project, if you go to the Nantucket Project, you're going to learn many things, right? Now, some of them you may never hear about again for the rest of your life, and some of them you may pursue them as a career. You know, it's not trite to say that Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg they probably share several things in common, but they share one really interesting thing in common, which is they never graduated from college, right? Like all three of them, like these three cultural business icons,
right,
didn't finish college. Now, well, how did they learn all the stuff they had to learn to do what they do? And the answer is they love what they do, and they're going to figure out how to learn the things they need to learn in order to do what they do. And I think if you know that, like, you got to know that Bill Gates didn't go to computer school. It did, right? He didn't. Like, neither did Steve Jobs. Like, they didn't go to computer school or iPad school or touch screen school. You know, like, there's no such thing. They just learned. And I can promise you they were bad at it in the beginning. I promise. They, like, the first day they weren't good at it. They didn't even understand it the first day. And they went one day after one day after one day, and I just believe that. And, you know, it's that whole thing of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, you know, I think one of the things, and I'm going to turn 50 in a couple weeks, and so I've been around a little bit, right? I've been around a little bit, and the older I get, the more I realize that those silly old things your grandfather said, they tend to be true. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's the answer. How do you learn how to go from one thing to the next? Right. It's one step at a time. And how do I know, for me or for anyone, I think, where to go next? Where's your inner being telling you you want to go next? What are you really into?
Yep. It's that whole follow your bliss, follow your passion. Now, I definitely want to ask you about, you know, you went from not being able to afford to go to a TED conference to co-directing and co-producing an amazing documentary on your ideal films on Richard Saul Wurman, who created TED and is an architect. And he has a line in there that most information doesn't inform, which I just thought was great. Can you tell us about what it was like to interview him and what gave you the idea?
Yeah. I mean, you mean for the film with him? Yeah. I mean, he is he's the master. You know, this guy talked about information architecture, information anxiety before Steve Jobs graduated from high school. I mean, like, this goes way back. He's had a crazy and interesting career, but his design mind, and I don't mean that in the way of just design, meaning graphic design or artistic design, but computer design and thinking design and speaking design. He has a design mind. You know, you asked earlier about how do you learn this or that. The number of things that he has learned and the way he goes about it and the way he treats the packaging of things he's learned or other people learn it's just one of a kind. And, you know, TED is a cultural prize. It's a powerful brand and a powerful concept. Well, this is the guy who started that, you know, and this is the guy who built that. And imagine some of the things he's seen and done. And to my knowledge, I'm going to guess you knew very little of him prior to seeing that film. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. And I pride myself in being pretty up on architects. You know, I have friends that work at Gensler. I, you know, saw the documentary on Frank Gehry. So, but he was somebody I'd never heard of, and his story is just amazing. So the fact that you co-directed and co-produced that was phenomenal.
Yeah, well, you know, again, I hopefully you see my passion for it and for him in that film. And
Definitely.
it's a film of a certain kind, right? It's probably not going to be next to the Avengers or, The Force Awakens in terms of viewership. But for people who are curious about a certain kind of thing, I'm proud of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what else are you working on now that you are excited about that we can look forward to seeing soon?
It's funny. Last week we had our first 2016 speaker meeting for the Nantucket Project this year. And it is... it's back to the drawing board. And what I would tell you is when we do this, when we sort of face another year and book another year of speakers, it's more about learning than it is about knowing. And what I mean is you got to stay open to the fact that whatever's going to be interesting in September probably barely exists right now.
Right, and whether it's robotics or 3D printing or,
exactly.
Virtual reality, whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes. So if you were going to ask me at the moment, what am I into? I'm into figuring out what I'm into.
Great.
There will probably be a few films in development about those things that we're preparing for next year. And listen, this should be a TV show. The Nantucket Project should be a TV show. And the TV show is something like 60 minutes. And it has segments something like 60 minutes. But it's a show about ideas. And each of the ideas are sort of carried out in like some form of a film that are really instructive, like the Richard Saul Wurman film that you saw. In success, that's where this goes.
Well, also, I think what you're saying, Tom, is give yourself a little permission not to know everything all the time during the creative process, right? Yeah, I think that's such a valuable takeaway. Well, before I let you go, I just want to ask you a couple more questions. One is, what's a book that you would like to recommend about business or life or philosophy, or as you said, following your inner being? Anything at all is any topic that I would love to hear what inspires you author-wise.
The two best books I've read recently, one is Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Mm-hmm. It's about race in America. And, I spoke earlier. I saw him speak a few months back. He was incredible. He was as good as anyone I've seen in years. And I'm watching him and I'm looking and I'm thinking like, okay, the guy's smart because he's definitely smart. But his brilliance was in the fact that he's gone to the front lines of death row and race in the South and in America. And he's made observations that are his observations. And he's come back from that front line and he shares with us those observations. I bet it's easy for him. And I could be wrong, and I've never spoken to him about it, but I could be wrong. And that's what sort of comes through in this book. Race is such an interesting topic that I've sort of looked at in a whole variety of ways throughout my life. But if I'm honest, in the last several years, it's been through the TV or through the newspaper, and to hear something that you can really get your brain around from somebody like him, that was amazing. But the other one I would say is probably one you've heard a few times is Ed Catmull's book called Creativity, Inc. on Pixar. I just love it. I love everything about Pixar, and it's really good storytelling. I think it's interesting to read a creative book from a science guy because at his heart he's much more of an X's. I say that he has a science background, he has an X's and O background, he has a technical background, but he writes very very well about creativity, and I just love that book.
We're going to put both of those in the show notes for the listeners. And finally, Tom, how can people follow you on social media? What's your Twitter account? Let's give out the website for the Nantucket Project.
Yeah, I am not a social media guy. It's interesting. It's not that I'm against it. I like our people to speak for themselves, and maybe I'll have something to say sometime in the future. But now I let my company speak for it, and it's the Nantucket Project. And you can follow the Nantucket Project on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I think we do a pretty good job. I am very focused on making this TV show I mentioned to you come to life, and pray for that to work. And then I think we'll be able to speak to lots of people in a powerful way.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an honor, and you've given us so many great insights. I'm very excited to see what comes up next, considering your track record, which is always a good predictor of people's passion and focus over and over again, figuring out how to make something new happen. Again, I can't wait to see what you bring to us. Thanks for being on the show.
Great. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.
Thanks for listening to the Successful Pitch podcast. If you like the show, please go to iTunes and write a review, and encourage your friends to write reviews too. It really helps get the word out. You know, people say that the longest distance is between someone's mouth and their wallet. People can tell you they're going to invest, but when it comes time to write the check, they don't do it. So how do you get people to say yes and then follow through? Visualize yourself on the left side of a riverbank, and you have to cross the river, and on the other side of the river is where the funding happens. So first you make up your idea, then you make it real, then you make it reoccur. Once you start dipping your toe into the water to get to funding, that's where I can help. I get you across that river faster than you would on your own, with a lot less frustration than you will get when you hear a bunch of no's and you don't know why. So if you want some help getting funded faster with less frustration, go to my free funding webinar, sellingsecretsforfunding.com/webinar, and sign up and get in-depth information on how you can get funded fast. Thanks.